This week on Parkinson, a Hollywood superstar, Kevin Costner, a comic dynamo, Lee Evans, and a man in this case behaving perfectly, actor Martin Clunes. Also music from the marvellous Texas.
Parkinson, tomorrow 9:05 on BBC One.
The news now on BBC One with Michael Burke. It's 10 o'clock.
Farmers are threatening to block the government's mass slaughter of healthy animals. Some are resigned to it, but others are threatening a rural revolt. The next Balkan flashpoint. The government says they're on the brink of war. And Spurs give George Graham the boot.
In the south, Vosper Thornycroft wins a contract to build Navy patrol ships. Hundreds of jobs will be saved. And Sussex police pioneer a new pepper spray to deal with violent offenders.
Good evening. There's growing opposition in the parts of the country worst affected by foot and mouth disease to the new government plans for mass slaughter of healthy animals. The Farmers' Union nationally continues to say it's distressing but necessary. Some farmers, though, are saying they'll stop any attempt to kill their animals if they show no signs of the disease. There are now 273 confirmed cases in the UK. 17 new cases today, including 4 in Wales, 2 in Durham and 2 in Scotland. Our environment correspondent Richard Bilton reports.
The fight against foot and mouth is clearing British fields. The suggestion of a risk is now enough for mass slaughter to be the answer. That means these Cumbrian lambs, only hours old, will not live much longer. The policy is any animal within 2 miles of a confirmed case will be killed. Many farmers say that is something they will not accept.
They can have all the rights in the world, but they'll not get through this gate. Definitely not.
What would you do?
I'm thinking about it. But I'm not alone. All my neighbours have the same opinion.
The pyres are already being built, a clear sign of the destruction to come. Police have revealed that they today have taken firearms from a farmer who allegedly threatened officials who came to kill his animals.
This has had a devastating effect on the people and the farming community in the county, quite understandably so. But when it comes to making threats, and particularly where firearms are involved, we need to respond to that.
There is now talk of rural revolt. Only a small demonstration today at Abbey Town in northern Cumbria, but feelings were clear.
I just want to fight for what's right. Mr. Brown's trying to do his job, but I'm trying to do mine.
We're doing everything we can to keep the infection off our farm. Still going to lose them.
The idea that healthy animals face slaughter has been criticised by some farming union leaders in Cumbria. But nationally, the union remains behind the government's plan.
I don't like any of this, but I recognise that we have to eradicate the disease, and this means hard measures.
The countryside of Dumfries and Galloway, dotted with smoking pyres, is the other area to face a mass cull. Tonight it was announced the Chief Veterinary Officer Jim Scudamore will visit areas before a cull goes ahead. But the government says the plan of a mass slaughter of sheep to trap the disease is still the right one.
We're not culling animals that are free of disease. We're culling animals that are at risk and may be harbouring the disease. If there was some way of telling which ones were which, of course we would use it, but there isn't.
The scale of what is planned has frightened farmers across the country. Ian Griffith has already had 2 culls on his Northamptonshire farm. The last time was because of suspicious contact. The animals actually tested clear. He says it is hard for farmers to accept.
When that actual phone call comes, like they said, Ian, I think you better sit down because I've got some bad news for you. I'll tell you something, when they tell you that, you want to bloody fall down, not just sit down.
Many farmers now feel that it is politics and not science that is leading the fight against this disease. There was support for the animal movement ban, but that is being replaced in many areas by anger that this mass slaughter is too heavy-handed and too many people are suffering. Richard Bilton, BBC News, Northamptonshire.
Oh, Kevin Bouquet is in Longtown, that's right in the centre of the outbreak of Cumbria, and Andrew Castle is at the disease control headquarters in Dumfries. Kevin, there's obviously a lot of farmers who are upset and angry, but what can they actually do to stop the ministry men coming onto their farms?
Well, there's been a lot of talk of that today, talk of people padlocking their gates, preventing the ministry of men from getting anywhere near their herds and their flocks of sheep. It's a bit of a non-starter. The ministry have a right to go onto whatever farmland they wish, and the police have made it clear tonight in Cumbria that they will help the ministry to enforce that. So there is really no prospect of the ministry being banned from farms.
So they can't actually physically stop the ministry men coming on their farms. So what are they going to do?
Well, a couple of things. One thing that all farmers are saying here that they'd like to see is a greater enforcement of the restrictions once an infection has been discovered. They say that up to now, when infections have been discovered, it's taking several days to deal with it, to slaughter herds, to dispose of the bodies. They want to see that work carried out more quickly and see if that might have some effect on preventing this or slowing this outbreak down without having to without having to slaughter healthy animals. One other thing is to try to persuade the government, and they'll be doing that next week when they talk to Jim Scudamore when he comes to Cumbria.
Andy Castle in Dumfries, are feelings running as high there?
Well, certainly there's a lot of despair and indeed frustration, Michael, that we're still in the grip of this foot and mouth disease. I think amongst the farmers I talked to around about Dumfries and Galloway, there's a reluctant acceptance that the cull of healthy animals has to go ahead, much though they detest the idea. I think a lot of the farms around this area are quite big concerns. They're also mixed farms, which means they have not just sheep but also large amounts of cattle and pigs on their farm. And I think the feeling is that if by destroying healthy sheep they can somehow get ahead of this disease and save their cattle, then at least they might be able to salvage something from this dreadful mess, which I think is why they feel rather more acceptance of it than perhaps they do south of the border there in Cumbria. But of course it's not an option that's available to a hill farmer in Cumbria who solely relies on sheep for a living.
Andy, Kevin, thanks very much. Well, dealing with the hundreds of thousands of animals condemned to slaughter is getting harder by the day. There's a serious shortage of vets to supervise the cull, and fuel for pyres to burn the carcasses is running low. Social Affairs editor Neil Dixon reports on how the authorities are trying to tackle the huge task of controlling the epidemic.
These cows were slaughtered on Monday. It wasn't until today that they were removed. It all adds to the frustration, the anger, the anguish of the farming community. Today, the government promised to speed things up, though for some it's already too little, too late.
The worst experience of my life. People say it's like a bereavement, and it is. You really, even now, although I know it's happened, I still cannot quite believe it.
And the latest cull of disease-free animals judged to be at risk has heightened passion still further. Measures to control foot and mouth have become increasingly severe. The first case was diagnosed on February the 19th. 4 days later, restrictions were placed on animal movement and markets were closed. And the following day, the mass slaughter began. But after 2 weeks, the incubation period of the virus, the number of cases continued to rise. So yesterday came the decision to kill animals in Cumbria and Dumfries within 2 miles of infected farms. The French took more drastic action from the outset, slaughtering sheep known to have come from the UK. So far, they've escaped with just 1 case. So could more have been done here?
Well, this whole thing has been due to the movement and mixing of sheep up and down the country.
Senior vets believe the government's approach has been the right one, but tracking the disease and stamping it out is proving more difficult than many imagined.
There is, in fact, a shortage of vets at the moment because once a vet has gone on to an infected premises, effectively that vet cannot visit another premises for at least a week after he or she has left the premises. There is also, I understand, a shortage of materials. One requires vast quantities of materials to burn even 1 cow, and these are not always readily available.
Some of those involved in the last major outbreak are being brought back into service to help out, including the vet who diagnosed the first case in 1967. This week, Hayden Christie diagnosed the first case in Cheshire. He believes the government has got it about right, but says it's vital the whole process is speeded up.
time from diagnosis to slaughter should be radically speeded up. That is my feeling, and you can't afford to have animals with the disease still alive for 2 to 3, 4 days after the diagnosis has been made.
Here at the Ministry, no one's predicting the end of this epidemic. It's already spread wider and lasted longer than many had thought likely. The war against this disease is by no means won. Neil Dixon, BBC News, at the Ministry of Agriculture.
The foot and mouth outbreak has meant that roughly half the normal amount of British meat is being produced for sale in our shops, supermarkets and restaurants. So imports have soared. But spinal cord that's banned under the BSE controls has been found in consignments coming in from 4 other EU countries.
Imports of meat into the UK are calculated to have risen tenfold since the foot and mouth outbreak. This plant in Sussex has doubled the number of consignments brought in from elsewhere in Europe. Today, as every day, meat hygiene inspectors are checking to ensure these German carcasses contain no spinal cord. Under EU-wide measures to control BSE, it must have been removed immediately after slaughter to protect public health. But in too many cases this hasn't been happening. There have been breaches most frequently in meat from Germany, forcing the European Commission to close down slaughterhouses. Bits of spinal cord have also been found in beef from the Netherlands, from the Irish Republic and Spain.
The fact we found some spinal cord and identified it shows that the inspection system is working. My concerns would be where items are coming in not on the carcass or in box format or inspections aren't taking place, that something could slip through.
Environmental health and trading standards officers have all been ordered to be more vigilant than ever, but policing foot and mouth means the system's under strain.
The checks people probably imagine are being done simply are not being done. I think if people realise quite how fragile the system was and how little safeguard there is on the edge, there would be a lot more quite serious concern than there is at the moment.
In this plant, every single imported carcass is thoroughly inspected, not just for BSE risk material, but also for any other sign of contamination or disease. But the question is, are meat imports elsewhere in the food chain so thoroughly checked? Nicola Coslaw, BBC News, Sussex.
And in a special edition of Newsnight at 10:30 on BBC Two, the Agriculture Minister Nick Brown will be answering questions from farmers and the tourism industry. Macedonia's defence minister has warned that his country is on the brink of war after intensified fighting between ethnic Albanian rebels and the security forces. The United Nations envoy to the Balkans, Carl Bildt, has told the 10 o'clock news that the West must take this latest conflict in the region very seriously. The crisis is centred on the northwestern town of Tetovo, close to Macedonia's border with Kosovo, where a pitched battle has been raging for 3 days.
Macedonia used to be a haven of peace in the Balkans. Not anymore. Nightfall and Macedonian forces fire up into the hills at Albanian fighters hoping to break up the country and its power-sharing government. The people of Tetovo, mostly of Albanian descent, are running for cover. They're also being forced to take sides. Some do feel second class beside the country's Slav majority. Some support the rebels. The country risks splitting apart. NATO has no mandate to fight here, but is firing off verbal warnings.
Those who use violence instead of dialogue must get a root message from the international community that there is no profit in what they do by this crude use of violence, especially against civilians.
NATO governments fear this crisis could become a war. The Albanian guerrilla bands first attacked in remote areas, but the government in Skopje couldn't stop the violence spreading westward. Tetovo is the biggest target so far, dragging more and more civilians into the front line. Macedonia's people, some 2 million of them, had learnt to overcome ethnic and religious divides. Rather less than a third are Albanian by descent and Muslim by faith. The majority, some 2/3, are Macedonian Slavs. They're Orthodox Christians. Political power is shared. The Albanian minority is represented with ministers in the government. The new fears are of Albanian extremists trying to create a greater Albania. demanding full independence for Kosovo and now fighting for chunks of Macedonia too.
I am very worried, that has to be said, because the integrity, stability, democracy of Macedonia is of course important for Macedonia, needless to say, but for people that are living here. But it's also central to everything that we've been trying to achieve in southeastern Europe for a long time, both peace and harmony between different national and ethnic groups.
They're at about 1,600 meters. Already, American troops are watching for Albanians heading to Macedonia. These patrols protecting Kosovo have arrested fighters, but NATO is very reluctant to get drawn in any deeper. That resolve now faces another very severe Balkan test. James Robbins, BBC News.
Here, an 18-year-old from Margate in Kent has been the youngest woman to be convicted of raping another woman. Claire Marsh took part in an attack by a gang of people on a 37-year-old woman on the Grand Union Canal towpath in West London. Blackfriars Crown Court heard that she'd punched the victim in the face, stripped her and pinned her down. Marjorie Evans, the head teacher accused of slapping one of her pupils, is free to go back to work. Governors from her school in Caldecott in South Wales spent 19 hours considering other allegations before clearing her name. Afterwards, she said she felt ecstatic. There was more pressure on the Europe Minister Keith Vaz today when details of the investigation into allegations of sleaze were made public. The report by the Common Standards Committee describes how Mr Vaz stopped cooperating with the inquiry into his conduct last December.
The smile is still in place, but Keith Vaz is feeling the pressure. Today, there's detailed evidence of how he refused to cooperate with a year-long inquiry into his conduct.
Are you confident in the report today?
Very. Downing Street is backing him, and he's right to say that no serious charges of financial misconduct were proved. But several accusations were dismissed because witnesses, including Mr Vaz, wouldn't cooperate with the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. Elizabeth Filkin's frustration is clear in correspondence published today. She told Mr Vaz's lawyer, members should not seek to mislead by keeping information from the Commissioner. Mr Vaz hired Geoffrey Bindman, the prominent solicitor, to represent him. He told the Commissioner, your inquiry has now lasted for 10 months, and it's difficult to see why it's still going on. My client is confident that he's answered all relevant questions and is not prepared to answer further questions. The MPs who took over the inquiry aren't happy.
This is not a satisfactory investigation, and we know it isn't. But a line had to be drawn at a certain point. Otherwise, people would say you're shoving it under the carpet and covering up in order to that it should still be investigated at the time of the general election.
Well, it's a catalogue of evasion, of intimidation and obstruction. The Prime Minister's judgment's already in question as a result of Peter Mandelson. Now he's sticking by a minister who's willfully obstructing the workings of the House of Commons. He should resign or he should be sacked.
This evening, Keith Vaz issued a statement insisting he dealt frankly and promptly with the investigation. He says there was simply a lack of evidence against him. This affair's reopened the debate about whether the system of MPs' self-regulation is working. The Standards Commissioner clearly doesn't believe she was given the kind of backing she needed. As for Keith Vaz, Downing Street wouldn't want to lose a trial of strength with the media and the opposition this close to an election. But if Labour wins and Tony Blair has more freedom to pick and choose a team of ministers, Keith Vaz's future may not look so secure. John Pinar, BBC News, Westminster.
There are growing fears tonight of a worldwide economic recession after another turbulent day on the stock markets. In London, the FT 100 fell sharply again to 55.63, down 166 points, its lowest level since the end of 1998. And in New York, the Dow Jones Index ended at 98.27, down 204 points. Well, Jeff Randall's our business editor. It's getting to be a serious slide on all the world's markets, isn't it? Big falls almost day after day. Is this a case of a quick recovery soon, or are we really in trouble?
Well, I don't like to call markets, Michael, but I can tell you this. The people I spoke to in the city today do not see this as a blip. They do not think that this is an aberration from which there's going to be a quick bounce. I think they believe that this is going to be the start of a long, sustained period of share price underperformance.
So what's actually happening? What's caused this really quite sudden collapse in confidence?
Well, I think the key to this is America. That's really where the dot-com bubble started. And it's all to do with American investment sentiment. 1 in 2 Americans, ordinary Americans, own shares. Many of them are very inexperienced investors, and they piled into that dot-com bubble in 98 and 99. Now, lots of them have lost their money. And I don't mean shares that have gone down in price. I'm talking about a total wipeout. They've been wiped out, their savings have gone, their borrowings have gone, and what has happened is there is a backwash from the financial markets into the consumer markets. If you've lost everything, and I mean everything, you can't buy the new refrigerator, you can't buy the new car, you can't go on holiday. So the financial markets are affecting the real markets.
Well, all that sounds sort of really gloomy, but it was only last week that Gordon Brown was slapping himself on the back for the British economy being in the pink, being better than it's ever been.
Well, the thing is, markets don't look backwards and they don't look towards today, they look towards tomorrow. Most financial markets anticipate events 15, 18 months ahead. And what these markets are saying, that 15 or 18 months down the line, they're expecting trouble. And if you look around the world, you can see why. In America, it does appear as though the country's heading into recession. In Japan, the lights are off and the government can't find a switch. And in Germany, the recovery is much slower than people had hoped for. So it's looking grim and the markets are getting very twitchy.
Jeff, thanks very much. Saudi Arabian special forces have stormed a hijacked Russian passenger plane, killing one of the hijackers and 2 hostages. The plane was on its way from Istanbul to Moscow yesterday when it was hijacked by Chechen rebels and forced to land at the Saudi Arabian city of Medina.
Through the cockpit window and the aircraft doors, Saudi special forces literally smashed their way inside. This is when brute force replaced the hours of negotiation. There were still around 100 passengers and crew on board as the terrifying ordeal drew to a violent close. The Chechen hijackers were first off the aeroplane. Forced to the tarmac, they were disarmed and restrained. It's reported one of them was killed during the operation. Doctors were then sent on board to treat those injured before the passengers were led away to safety. They'd been held captive for almost 24 hours and looked distressed and confused. They've now been taken to local hotels and hospitals to recover. Their hijackers were Chechen rebels demanding an end to the Russian campaign in Chechnya. But the Saudi government said negotiations with them had broken down, and the decision to storm the aircraft had prevented further bloodshed. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
Here, George Graham has been sacked as Tottenham Hotspur's manager after criticising the amount of money given to him for new players. Graham was summoned to an emergency meeting and told that the club's new owners, ENIC, could no longer work with him. He called it bizarre and inexplicable.
At the Spurs shop outside White Hart Lane, they've already started their end-of-season clear-out sale, but nobody imagined the manager would be gone before this year's strip had been sold out. A terse, angry statement from the club's new owners, ENIC, confirmed George Graham's summary sacking, following a series of newspaper articles in which he revealed he was less than happy with the future budget he'd been given for strengthening the team. Tottenham's vice-chairman left no doubts that the parting of the ways had been acrimonious.
He was very defiant, aggressive, and in my view, certainly not in any way thinking about the best for the club and about the interests of the club. And as a result of that, I've asked him to leave the employment of the club.
For many Spurs fans, it had always been a marriage made in hell. The man, synonymous with success at their hated rivals Arsenal, now bringing an alien football culture to the other half of North London. He did win the Worthington Cup 2 years ago, but not with the style the club's tradition demanded. Ironically, though, only last Sunday, an exhilarating performance against West Ham had earned Spurs an FA Cup semi-final against Arsenal. And some of his detractors were just starting to have second thoughts. George Graham issued a statement tonight saying that he regarded his sacking as bizarre, and he threatened to take legal action unless Tottenham honour the remainder of his contract, which still has a year to run. That could end up costing the club in excess of £2 million. Kevin Geary, BBC News at White Hart Lane.
Manchester United have been drawn against Bayern Munich in the quarter-finals of the Champions League, the team they beat to win the trophy 2 years ago. The holders, Real Madrid or Galatasaray, will meet the winners in the semi-final. There's also the prospect of an all-English semi between Leeds and Arsenal, but first they must overcome the Spanish sides Deportivo La Coruña and Valencia. And in the semi-final of the UEFA Cup, Liverpool have been drawn against the tournament favourites Barcelona. England are in a strong position after day 2 of the third and final test against Sri Lanka in Colombo. They closed on 175 for 4, that's 66 runs behind, with 6 wickets in hand.
whole country will be...
Andy Caddick and the other bowlers took less than 40 minutes to polish off the Sri Lankan innings, with only 20 more runs added and with all parts of the England game plan running smoothly. The openers, Atherton and Trescothick, eased their way to 44 without loss at lunch, and England were already eyeing up a first innings lead.
Linda Vass might have had the better in the first two tests.
But this whole series has been a tale of the unexpected, and when Trescothick's lusty blow hit Russell Arnold, a broken rib seemed the likely outcome rather than a freak dismissal, with the ball settling in the folds of the fielder's shirt.
That had hit him.
The now routine umpiring incident involved Nasser Hussain, who clearly wasn't caught cleanly in the slips.
No.
Nonetheless, he
No one
received
did.
the dreaded
Dead.
signal to be on his
They
way
calling for it?
before the third umpire decided, on television
No, hang
evidence,
on.
to put right a miscarriage of justice. Hussain was out soon afterwards anyway, and England's form player Graham Thorpe took control with a fluent and determined display of stroke making. Thorpe reached and passed 50, and his 71 not out summed up another gutsy England performance. England trail Sri Lanka by 66 runs, and the batsmen have a lot of work to do tomorrow. Any result is still possible in this most compelling and unpredictable of series. Neil Bennett, BBC News in Colombo.
OK, it's 25 past 10. I'll be back a little later with an update on the day's headlines. But now we join our news teams across the United Kingdom.
Good evening, I'm Pauline Brandt. Now the latest news in the south. Hundreds of jobs at Vosper Thornycroft in Southampton have been saved thanks to a new contract from the Navy. The Vosper's yard has been chosen to build 3 new patrol vessels. The majority of the workers will now be protected from redundancy for another 2 years. Stuart Norval reports.
Only last October these workers were told they'd be out of work by this spring. But today the Defence Procurement Minister Baroness Simons came to Vosper Thornycroft's Woolston yard to give them the good news. Their jobs are safe.
It's good news for the people that have been under the threat of redundancy for quite some time now. And obviously we're very, very pleased.
Delighted with the news, obviously, you know, it's a great boost for the yard. I mean, it's something we've been waiting for a long time.
Vosper's is the preferred bidder for 3 new patrol vessels to be built over the next 2 years. It's hoped the contracts will be signed formally by the end of next month. Once in service, the vessels will patrol our fishing waters and protect oil and gas installations. It's expected they'll be based in Portsmouth.
My main reason for wanting to get ahead with this is in order to get the ships quickly to the Royal Navy. We need these ships, and it's important that we get them as soon as possible.
Vosper says there will still be a few job losses, but most of the workforce will now be kept on.
We live in a very, very cost-competitive industry, and there may be need for a small number of redundancies to go ahead, but the vast majority of those jobs are now completely secure.
Well, this is where the patrol boats will be built, inside this massive covered hangar at Vosper Thornycroft. Despite its recent decline, today's announcement proves that shipbuilding is still vital to the South's economy. Stuart Norval, BBC South Today.
In contrast, the South Korean car company Daewoo is to cut another 90 jobs from its UK technical centre in West Sussex. The site at Worthing employed 750 workers before the parent company went bankrupt last year. The latest cutback will leave 160 employees at the centre, which is expected to be sold next week. A third person has been arrested by Thames Valley Police in connection with a murder in Berkshire last month. Alexander Griffin was killed and Arthur de Souza seriously injured during a shooting in the village of Pangbourne. Detectives say a 23-year-old man from Woodley is being questioned at Loddon Valley Police Station, together with a 36-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman. A police detective from Dorset has been jailed for 6 years for helping to run a cannabis factory. Michael Newson was found guilty of conspiracy to grow and supply the drug last month at Bournemouth Crown Court. 3 other men have also been jailed for their part in the crime. This report from Richard Drax.
The Newson brothers had dreamed of using the proceeds to buy a fish farm in Devon, but it's not to be. They were under surveillance from the start. This police video shows Michael Newson visiting the factory shortly before it was raided. Newson, seen here in the green jacket during his trial, was the eyes and ears of the operation. He used police computers to see if the gang were being watched. Michael Newson's brother Anthony, who's from West Sussex, masterminded the operation. He was jailed for 4 years. Mark Cooney and Robert Fry, who are both from Poole, were each sent down for 2.5 years.
I am satisfied that the sentence properly reflects the serious offences committed by Peter Newson. He not only let himself down as a police officer, but his colleagues and the people of Dorset.
The factory was based in this innocent-looking building only a short distance away from Kinston Police Station. Mark Cooney was responsible for cultivating the cannabis. The judge said the gang had all played their part in a very substantial operation. Had it gone according to plan, they could have earned hundreds of thousands of pounds. Referring to Michael Newson, who was a serving police officer at the time, he said that in addition to his crime, it had been an enormous breach of trust. Michael Newson was jailed for 6 years. Richard Drax, BBC South Today, at Bournemouth Crown Court.
Sussex Police Force is to become the first in the country to arm its officers with canisters of pepper spray. It says it's safer and more effective than CS spray, which is used by other forces. Mark Sanders reports.
No! I will spray you on this day. You do not want to be sprayed with this. I'm warning you, it's very unpleasant.
In future, if a Sussex officer is being threatened, this is what they'll do.
Do not move towards us! Put the bat down! On the floor!
In 2 weeks' time, they'll be using it on the streets. Nearly every other force in the country uses CS spray to incapacitate a violent offender. But Sussex Police feels that the pepper spray is superior.
Once it's sprayed, everyone is safe. Whereas with other sprays, yes, they do incapacitate the subject, but everyone else is at risk at getting a small dose themselves.
Sussex Police insists that their spray, which is just a synthetic version of chili pepper, poses no long-term risk to health, whereas there have been questions about the safety of the CS solution used by other forces. Some civil rights groups are worried at officers on patrol carrying incapacitant spray, but Sussex Police says it's better for officers to use an incapacitant spray than a baton. Mark Sanders, BBC South Today, Sussex Police Headquarters.
Engineers at Vodafone's new headquarters in Newbury say bad weather has delayed plans to plant hundreds of trees. It's to block the view of the £120 million building from nearby homes. But despite the wettest winter for 300 years, they're still on schedule to finish the controversial multi-million-pound site. Now for a look at the weather. Tonight, cloudy and damp with occasional heavy rain, easing towards dawn. Minimum temperature 4 Celsius, that's 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, staying cloudy with rain or drizzle, becoming heavier and more persistent later. Light northeast breezes, maximum temperature 7 Celsius, 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, that's all the news from us for this evening. Now we go back to London and Michael Burke.
And the main news again tonight. Opposition is growing to new government plans for the mass slaughter of healthy animals. Some farmers are saying they'll stop any attempt to kill their animals if they show no sign of foot and mouth. Our Newsnight starting now over on BBC Two, but from the 10 o'clock news, good night.
Good evening to you. Comic relief is certainly not the way to describe the weather at the moment, or indeed over the weekend. These weather fronts never very far away, giving southern parts some cold, wet and windy weather. And they're marking the dividing line, the battle zone as we keep calling it, between this much, much warmer weather over France. Temperature in Paris 19 degrees this afternoon, only 5 degrees across northern parts of England. And these troublesome, biting, raw northeasterly winds are going to be with us right the way through the weekend, as you see here. Eventually, after the weekend, they'll probably tend to die away, but then that brings along another problem in that frost will become pretty widespread. Now, I've got a good deal of cloud pushing up across the country at the moment, as you see here on the radar sequence. You can also see the rain that's moved into the south, and I think by now that rain will be beginning to turn to sleet and snow in 1 or 2 places. And that rain's going to be a problem. It's going to be across central and southern areas of England and Wales for some considerable time. We could well have some local flooding, and we do indeed have the risk of that rain turning to sleet and snow, especially over the Midlands and parts of Wales. Computer indicating just that as it heads a little bit further northwards during the rest of the night. I think the rain will ease off in southern counties as well, and across the south there, temperatures won't be too bad, but it is going to be cold in central and northern areas, a raw wind, and in fact a widespread frost. in northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. That northern half of the country is going to be quite bright tomorrow, some sunshine but 1 or 2 snow showers. These tend to get heavier and more frequent probably as time goes on. For Wales, the Midlands through East Anglia into the south, a grey, quite miserable, raw day with outbreaks of rain, sleet and snow. Most of the sleet and snow I think is going to be through the Midlands and into Wales and chiefly over the hills, but you may well find that some of you wake up to some sort of sleety, slushy stuff even in the morning, and that's the way it's going to stay right the way through tomorrow. Just a hint perhaps of a little bit of brightness coming down into some of those northern areas at the same time as another pulse of rain runs through southern counties, but particularly cold just about everywhere, although temperatures perhaps still holding up in the far south and the southwest. But you put together the wind and those temperatures and it certainly will feel as if it's well below freezing, as you can see virtually everywhere. In fact, temperature feeling as though it was about -5, for instance, in Birmingham. Now this nasty weather with rain, sleet and snow is still going to be affecting southernmost parts into Sunday. Further north, central and northern areas brighter with a scattering of snow showers after early frost. By Monday I think we're going to find all that out the way, just a few snow showers. So all in all I think we can say it's pants to the weather. Have a lovely weekend.